At 3 in the morning, the emergency room nurse called. She said, "Your husband was in a car accident."
He's fine.
The mother of his child got a scare. "Could you bring a change of clothes for the baby?" I hung up the phone. My fingers pressed into the marble kitchen island. The marble was freezing cold. I had been married for 7 years. I didn't have any children at all. I turned and walked up the stairs. The wooden floorboards creaked. I pushed open the bedroom door and went to the closet. I grabbed a gray long coat and put it on. I stuffed the car keys into my pocket. At the entrance, I changed into a pair of old flats. I pushed open the front door, and the November wind rushed into my collar. I started the silver Honda sedan. The steering wheel was cold as iron. The tires crunched over the dry leaves on the driveway, making a crisp sound. The street was empty. The traffic lights blinked rhythmically at the intersection. I stopped at a 24-hour convenience store on the corner. I pushed open the glass door, and an electronic bell rang on the counter. I walked straight to the baby section at the back. A row of discounted onesies hung on the rack. I grabbed 2 yellow cotton baby outfits. I also picked up a pack of the smallest size diapers. I went to the counter to pay. The cashier yawned and stuffed the items into a plastic bag. I handed her a $20 bill. I shoved the change into my coat pocket. As I walked out, the coins clinked against each other in my pocket. I drove the car into the open parking lot outside the hospital emergency building. I found a visitor spot near the entrance and parked. I pulled out the key. I pushed open the door, and the smell of disinfectant mixed with cold air hit me. I carried the plastic bag with the baby clothes, stepped over the speed bumps, and walked to the emergency front desk. The front desk nurse was looking down at a form. I tapped on the glass. "Eric Davis," I said, giving my husband's name. The nurse tapped on the computer keyboard. "Observation room 3, she said, pointing down the hallway. I walked down the hallway. The fluorescent lights on the ceiling were blinding. The soles of my shoes slapped against the linoleum floor. As I passed observation room 1, I saw the man getting stitches. I kept walking. I stopped at the door of observation room 3. The door was half open. I took a deep breath and pushed it open. The hospital bed was empty. A blue plastic visitor chair sat next to it. A woman was sitting in it. She wore a gray flannel pajama set with a men's black windbreaker over it. She held a sleeping baby in her arms. There was a noticeable coffee stain on the left sleeve of the windbreaker. I recognized that stain. Last month, I tried every detergent and couldn't get it out. The woman looked up when she heard the door open. Her eyes were bloodshot. She asked, "Did the nurse send you to drop off paperwork?" I shook my head. I set the plastic bag on the low cabinet next to me. "I brought baby clothes," I said.
She paused.
She stood up holding the baby. "Did the nurse call you?"
"Who are you?"
I looked her straight in the eyes. "Eric's wife." The woman stepped back sharply. Her back hit the chair. The baby in her arms whimpered. She quickly patted the baby's back. She stared at me, her lips trembling. "You're crazy. I'm legally married. I'm Eric's wife." Holding the baby with one arm, she fumbled in her coat pocket with the other. She pulled out a brown wallet, opened it, and took out a card to hand to me. I reached out with my right hand and took it. It was a Washington State driver's license. The name on it was Sarah Johnson. The address line listed a street in Seattle. At the bottom was a photo of 2 people. Eric had his arm around her, both of them laughing at the camera. On her left ring finger, she wore a square-cut diamond ring. I handed the license back to her. I also pulled out my own license from my bag and handed it to her. Wyoming. My name. My address. I raised my left hand at the same time. On my ring finger, I wore an identical square-cut diamond ring. Sarah stared at my license. She gently placed the baby in the center of the hospital bed and pulled a blanket over him. She reached out and took my license, turning it over and over. She rubbed her finger over the embossed stamp. "He's only in Seattle 2 weeks a month," Sarah said in a low voice. "He's away on business 2 weeks a month." I finished her sentence. Sarah unzipped the windbreaker. She pulled a small booklet from the inside pocket. It was a dark blue passport. She flipped to the visa page and held it up to me. It was covered in entry stamps from various countries. He does international trade. He flies to Europe often for business. I pulled my phone out of my coat pocket, unlocked the screen, pulled up Eric's shared calendar, held it out to her. Red blocks filled half of each month on the screen. He told me this was his law firm's court schedule, all on the East Coast. We stood under the harsh fluorescent lights. No screaming in the hospital room. No one throwing punches. Just the occasional beep from the equipment in the corner. Sarah walked over to the hospital bed, opened the bedside table drawer. Inside was Eric's black leather wallet. She pulled it out and dumped it directly onto the white sheets. A few credit cards fell out, scattering everywhere. She pointed at a black card. This card is linked to our mortgage in Seattle. I pointed at the blue card next to it. This card automatically deducts the car insurance premium in Wyoming every month. Sarah braced her hands on the edge of the bed. She was gasping for air, her chest heaving violently. I walked to the water cooler, grabbed a paper cup, filled it with warm water, and handed it to her. She took it and chugged it down in one go. The cup hit the table with a sharp crack. How did the accident happen? I asked. Sarah pointed out the window. He had a few drinks last night, insisted on driving to buy diapers, ran into a fire hydrant at an intersection. Where is he now? The nurse took him for a CT scan. The doctor suspects a mild concussion. Sarah turned to look at me. Her hair was falling loose. She pointed at the baby in the hospital bed. He tricked me into signing 3 joint guarantee loan agreements. Said he wanted to expand the Seattle business. Total loan amount, $600,000. I stared into her eyes. He just used my name last month to mortgage our house in Wyoming. Took $400,000. Said he was going to invest in a high-return medical project in Texas. $200,000 plus $100,000. That's $1 million. He never invested in any project. He's been frantically moving money. Sarah's hands started shaking. She grabbed the Washington State driver's license, her nails scraping against the plastic card, making an unbearably harsh sound. From the hallway came the sound of wheels rolling on the floor, and a man's voice. Once I finish the discharge paperwork, we'll head straight back to Seattle. That deal needs to be finalized ASAP. It was Eric's voice. Sarah whipped her head toward the door. She quickly grabbed the wallet from the bed, stuffed the cards back in haphazardly, and threw it into the drawer. I locked my phone screen, put it back in my coat pocket. I stepped back 2 paces and stood in the shadowy corner behind the hospital room door. Sarah forcefully smoothed her hair, bent down, and picked up the baby. She turned to look at me, biting her lower lip hard, and nodded firmly. The door handle turned downward. Eric was wheeled in by a male nurse. A band of white medical gauze was wrapped around his forehead. "Honey, you must be terrified, right?" Eric looked at Sarah and extended his right hand. Sarah stepped forward and clasped his hand with both of hers. "I was terrified. Thank God you're safe." I stood in the shadow behind the door, watching Eric's unsuspecting face. He was still smiling. I took a step, then another, walking slowly to the hospital bed. My flat shoes made a dull thud on the floor. I reached out and gripped the white metal bed rails tightly. I shook the bed frame violently. The iron frame slammed against the floor with a loud clang. "Liar!" I shouted at Sarah. I grabbed the stainless steel water cup from the side table and hurled it at the corner of the wall. The cup hit the white wall, denting it, then fell to the floor and rolled twice. Water splashed onto the baseboard. Sarah immediately stepped back. She cradled the baby in her arms. She pointed at my face and screamed, "Get out. Eric and I are married. We have a child together. Get out." Our voices echoed in the small hospital room. Eric sat in the wheelchair, gripping the armrests tightly. The veins on the back of his hands bulged. He tried to stand, but as soon as he put weight on his right leg, he collapsed back into the seat. The wheelchair slid half a meter backward and hit the wall. "Stop. Please stop." Eric gasped for air. Cold sweat dripped down his forehead, running along his cheeks and onto the collar of his hospital gown. I turned around and strode over to him. I looked down at him from above. "You want to protect her, right?" "Fine. By 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, transfer $500,000 into my personal account. $1 short, and I'll take this pile of bills to your law firm. I'll print 100 copies of your bigamy evidence and stick them on the glass door of your partner meeting room. Eric swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed up and down. He looked up at me, his voice hoarse. I don't have that much cash on hand right now. All the funds are tied up in the Texas project. I grabbed the blue plastic visitor chair next to me and slammed it onto the floor. The back snapped on impact, plastic shards scattering at Eric's feet. Tomorrow morning at 8. Figure it out yourself. I turned and walked out of the hospital room. I didn't look back. I strode down the long hallway and pushed through the glass doors of the emergency building. The cold wind hit my face. I walked to my Honda, pulled open the door, and sat inside. I started the engine and turned on the heat. I drove 3 blocks to a 24-hour drive-in diner. There was only one beat-up pickup truck in the parking lot. I parked and went inside. The place smelled of fried grease from the French fries. I picked a red booth in the far corner and sat down. A waitress came over, and I ordered a black coffee. 20 minutes later, the glass door of the diner swung open. The brass bell on the door jingled. Sarah walked in wearing her black windbreaker with a coffee stain. She looked around, then came straight to my booth, pulled out a chair, and sat down. The child in her arms was already fast asleep. He just called 3 times, Sarah said, placing her phone on the wooden table. The screen was lit. He contacted a used car lot owner, getting ready to sell that Porsche he keeps in his garage in Wyoming. I took a sip of black coffee. The bitter taste spread through my mouth. The Porsche will sell for $100,000 at most. For the remaining $400,000, he'll tap into his emergency fund in Seattle. Sarah pulled a crumpled envelope from her pocket and slid it across the table to me. There's a new bank card in here. I opened the account under my family's name. Once he deposits the money into your account, transfer it to this card immediately. I reached out and pressed my hand on the card. He paid me off to keep quiet. Next, he'll try to placate you. You need to force him to transfer the full ownership of the Seattle house to you. Sarah nodded. She took a big gulp of the ice water on the table. He'll definitely make excuses to stall. You have to threaten him. Say you'll take the child and go back to your parents' place and sue him for defrauding you on the loan. I tapped my fingers on the table. Sarah took a deep breath. He has an offshore fund, about $300,000. He's been hiding it from me, but last month when I was doing laundry, I found the fund company's statement in his suit jacket pocket. Dawn broke. 7:30 in the morning. I was sitting on the couch at home. My phone dinged. A bank deposit alert popped up. $50,000 exactly. The sender was Eric. I stood up and walked to the study. I turned on the computer and logged into online banking. I entered the card number Sarah had given me last night. I entered the amount. $50,000. I clicked transfer. The screen showed transaction successful. Just then, there was a knock at the front door. I went to the entryway and unlocked the door. Standing outside was a man in a gray suit. He held a black briefcase. He handed me a business card. Hello, Mrs. Davis. My name is Miller. I'm the independent financial auditor for Eric's law firm. The man adjusted his glasses. I looked down at the card. The embossed stamp felt rough to the touch. Mr. Miller opened his briefcase and pulled out a document. Early this morning, Eric illegally diverted $500,000 from a client's trust account. That money was deposited into your personal account an hour ago. The firm has filed a police report. The authorities will freeze your account at any moment. I stared at the document in his hand. The red stamp on it was glaringly obvious. Eric hadn't sold the car at all. To scrape together that money, he'd directly stolen from the firm's client funds. He'd sent me that tainted money. If I didn't act fast, I'd be an accomplice to embezzlement. I shoved the card into my pocket. I don't know what you're talking about. That money isn't with me anymore. I slammed the door shut. I locked both deadbolts. Leaning against the wooden door, I immediately pulled out my phone and dialed Sarah's number. The phone rang 5 times before she picked up. Log into that new account right now. I shouted into the phone. That $500,000 isn't clean at all. He stole it from the firm's client money. The auditor's already here. The account is about to be frozen. Sarah paused for a few seconds on the other end. In the background, I could hear airport announcements. Oh my God. He just texted me, said he's already in the departure lounge, about to fly back to Seattle. He also asked if I'd checked that $300,000 offshore fund account. I hurried to the desk, pulled open a drawer, and grabbed a stack of blank letter paper. Listen, before anyone traces that card under your family's name, we need to fabricate a shell company's fake accounting records right now. We have to make it look like he lost that money on a failed private investment. We can't let this fire burn both of us. What do I need to do? Sarah was breathing heavily on the phone. Go back to the Seattle house right now. Head to the basement and smash open those file cabinets he always keeps locked. Use a sledgehammer. Photograph all his client lists and send them to me, I said as I unplugged the computer's power cord. I grabbed the car keys off the table and rushed out the door. I had to completely clear out all the paper documents in this house before the auditor came back with his team. I drove 2 blocks and slammed on the brakes in an empty lot next to a gas station. I pulled out the key. The cold wind outside rattled the metal billboard on the roadside. I picked up my backpack from the passenger seat, unzipped it, and pulled out my silver laptop. I set the computer flat on the steering wheel and pressed the power button. The screen lit up, white light shining on my face. I connected to my phone's mobile hotspot, opened the browser, and typed in the URL for the new account Sarah had given me last night. I tapped the keyboard and entered the password. A red exclamation mark popped up in the center of the screen. Wrong password. I squinted and typed it again. Still wrong. I picked up my phone and dialed Sarah's number. 2 rings, then dead air. She hung up directly. I called again, and the system said the phone was off. I gripped the edges of the steering wheel with both hands. There was a deep scratch on the leather cover. Sarah had taken that $500,000. She never went to the basement to smash the file cabinets. She chose to swallow that huge sum. I let go, opened the glove compartment, fished out a black encrypted USB drive from the very back. I plugged it into the side port of the laptop. A green-red notification popped up in the bottom right corner of the screen. I opened a hidden folder. Inside was only one executable package named Tax Auto Reporting. Last night at the restaurant, when she handed me the card number, I noticed the frequency of her fingers tapping the table. A woman willing to cooperate in fraudulently obtaining multiple loans for money would absolutely not resist the temptation of $500,000 in cash. When I transferred the money to her account, I casually embedded an auto-trigger script in the underlying data of the electronic remittance slip. I moved the mouse cursor over the package. Double-clicked. A black command window popped up on the screen. Lines of white code scrolled up rapidly. 5 seconds later, the progress bar hit 100%. The system displayed, form sent. A suspicious asset declaration form filled with Sarah's personal information and attached with the record of that $500,000 transfer was packaged and sent directly to the IRS money laundering monitoring system. The system would immediately lock that account. I pulled out the USB drive and tossed it into the backpack on the passenger seat, closed the laptop, restarted the car. I drove to the main branch of Union Bank downtown, parked on the second basement level. I pushed open the car door, walked into the elevator, and pressed the button for the 3rd floor VIP business area. The elevator doors opened. I stepped onto the thick carpet and walked to the front desk. The girl at the desk wore a black uniform. I requested a private meeting room with panoramic glass windows. I walked in, sat down on a brown single leather sofa. A pot of hot black tea sat on the table. I poured a cup and held it in my hands to warm them. 20 minutes later, a clatter of footsteps came from the hallway. The frosted glass door of the meeting room was shoved open forcefully. The door handle slammed into the wall with a loud bang. Eric strode in. The gauze on his forehead was gone, replaced by a square white bandage. He wore a dark gray wool coat. Sarah followed closely behind him. She had changed into an expensive khaki trench coat today, carrying a designer bag with a metal clasp. 2 uniformed police officers stood outside the door, blocking the hallway. "Officer, arrest her," Eric shouted, turning to the police outside. He pointed his right hand straight at my face. "She blackmailed me. She forced me to transfer $500,000 from the firm's client trust. She also threatened to ruin my career. One officer stepped inside, hand resting on his belt. "Ma'am, please stand up." Sarah walked over to Eric. She pulled her phone out of her coat pocket and handed it to the officer. "Officer, I can testify. She acted like a crazy person in the emergency room last night. This morning she called and forced me to help her launder money. I firmly refused." Sarah tapped the screen with her fingertip, pulled up a recording. My voice came clearly from the speaker. "Before anyone else finds out, we absolutely cannot let this fire burn us." She had precisely clipped that section, removed the context. Eric slammed both hands on the glass coffee table, rattling the teacup on top. He stared at me, the corners of his mouth lifting, showing his teeth. "You think you could outsmart me?" Sarah stopped me at the airport. "She told me everything. She helped me intercept your dirty money." Sarah raised her phone screen, pointing it at my face. The screen displayed the balance of that new account, $500,000 untouched. "I've already transferred the money safely to my personal cold wallet. This money, as evidence, will be returned to the law firm immediately. You're finished." She turned to look at Eric. They exchanged a smug glance. I sat on the sofa, not moving a muscle. I watched the phone screen in Sarah's hand. "Refresh the page now," I said softly. Sarah froze. She looked down, swiped her thumb across the screen. A blue spinning circle appeared in the middle of the page. The circle vanished. The number that had shown $500,000 suddenly reset to 0. A massive red warning box popped up on the screen. "Account frozen by the IRS. Suspected violation of anti-money laundering laws. Pending in-depth investigation." Sarah's hand shook violently. The phone clattered onto the glass coffee table. The screen hit the edge of the glass, instantly cracking with a long fissure. Eric shot up. He grabbed the phone from the table, his eyes wide. "What happened? Where's the money? What did you do?" He shouted at Sarah, spittle flying onto her face. The elevator dinged from outside. 4 men in black suits pushed past 2 police officers and strode into the meeting room. The man in front pulled a black wallet from his inner pocket, flipping it open with one hand. Inside was a silver federal medal badge. "Ms. Sarah Johnson. We're from the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. 40 minutes ago, we received a system-level alert. An unverified deposit of $500,000 was made into your account, and you attempted to transfer it to an offshore cold wallet." The suited man turned to Eric. "Mr. Eric Davis. The law firm has filed a full report with the Economic Crime Investigation Unit. We've cross-referenced the numbers, and this money is exactly the amount you embezzled from client trust funds." Eric's mouth fell open. He stumbled backward, his back slamming hard into a landscape decoration on the wall. The frame tilted, scraping against the wallpaper with a tearing sound. "The money's with her." Eric pointed frantically at Sarah. "It's in her account. She just admitted it's her cold wallet. She stole everything." Sarah let out a shriek and lunged at him, grabbing the collar of his wool coat with both hands. "You liar. You made me open that account. You told me to intercept the money." Eric shoved Sarah's shoulders hard. She was wearing stiletto heels, her ankle twisted sharply, and she lost her balance, crashing heavily onto the single sofa. Her designer bag hit the floor, spilling lipstick, keys, and loose change everywhere. "Officer, arrest her. She's blackmailing me." Eric pointed at me, his voice hoarse. The IRS investigator stepped forward, directly blocking me. He pulled out a printed document. "Sir, Mrs. Davis voluntarily submitted complete transfer records and evidence of coercion to our online system an hour and a half ago. After the money left her account, all the transaction trails prove that you and Ms. Johnson conspired to transfer this substantial asset." The police officer stepped up. He pulled out a pair of silver handcuffs. The metal chains clinked together with a crisp click. Eric scrambled backward. He flailed his arms, knocking over the teapot on the table. Scalding tea splashed onto the dark carpet, sending up a puff of steam. The teapot rolled off and shattered into several pieces. "Let me go. You've got the wrong person. This is a setup." Two officers grabbed his shoulders from both sides, forcing his arms behind his back. The handcuffs snapped shut around his wrists. Sarah sat on the sofa, her hands covering her face, her body curled into a ball. I stood up, straightened the hem of my coat. I picked up the car keys from the table, stepped over the ceramic shards on the floor, and skirted around Eric, who was still struggling wildly. I walked to the door of the meeting room,
Stopped.
turned to look Eric in the eyes. Tomorrow morning at 8. My lawyer will send the divorce papers to your detention center. I pushed open the glass door and headed straight for the elevator. 3 days after Eric was taken away, I got a call from the detention center. A man's voice, claiming to be Eric's defense attorney. He said Eric wanted to see me and was willing to sign an agreement to forfeit all joint marital assets in exchange for me going to the police station to withdraw the statement about coercion. I hung up the phone and immediately blocked that number. I wasn't idle. Now that the money trail had been exposed, I had to clean up the remaining loose ends. I found the shipping box marked Seattle. Inside were various odds and Sarah had left behind. I pulled out the thick photo album with the metal clasp. On the back of every photo, the date and location were written. One photo caught my attention. It showed Eric standing on a beach, holding a dark blue safe deposit key, with a row of low-rise vacation cottages behind him. I examined the pattern on the key handle with a magnifying glass. It was a triangular emblem, identical to the mark on a ring I'd seen in his study in Wyoming. I boarded a plane and landed in Seattle. I hailed a taxi and, based on the geographical features in the photo, found the so-called Vacation Beach. It was a private beach resort where every house looked exactly the same. I circled the cottages. At the back door of the third row, sixth house, I spotted an old vent. I walked over and reached behind the loose board. My fingers touched a hard metal object, a small square safe. I brought it back to my hotel. I inserted the ring with a triangular mark into the lock. With a click, the safe opened. There was no cash inside, just a few bank checks and a ledger. I opened the ledger. It was densely filled with records of loans Eric had taken out over the past 5 years using my social security number in various states. Next to each loan was a name, Matthew Davis. That was Eric's brother, the man who was supposedly killed in a car accident 5 years ago. I stared at the name. My heartbeat didn't quicken. I immediately called the tax investigator who had contacted me earlier. I said I'd found new key evidence. The person on the other end paused for a few seconds, then told me the IRS had always had doubts about Matthew Davis's death certificate. Just as I was about to leave the hotel to meet up, the door lock turned from the outside. A man in cheap work clothes stood in the doorway. He held a screwdriver. He reeked of motor oil. He stared straight at the ledger in my hand. "That's mine, ma'am," the man said, his voice rough as sandpaper on wood. I recognized him. He was the manager of the beach resort. I'd seen him in the background of the photo. I looked at his hand. The fingers gripping the screwdriver were strong, with a prominent scar on the knuckle. I remember the edge of that photo. The man handing Eric a cigarette had that same knuckle. "You're Matthew," I said. The man didn't answer. He locked the door behind him. The room was small, the window showing only gray sea.
He stepped toward me.
I quickly slid the ledger under the bed. I walked to the table and grabbed a bottle of water sitting there. The cap was still sealed. I looked at him, my heartbeat perfectly steady. "Did Eric tell you I was here?" I asked. Matthew gave a cold laugh. "He sent you to get the ledger, so you'd walk right into the trap. He told me if you found this place, I should grab the ledger and lock you in the basement. He said you have millions in secret accounts. If we control you, we can make a comeback." I didn't move. I watched Matthew's boots. The soles were wet with beach sand. He shifted his weight to his left leg, the mark of someone who'd been pacing behind the beach cottage. Suddenly, Matthew lunged at me. He reached for my shoulder. I sidestepped sharply to the left and slammed the water bottle into his face. Water splashed everywhere. The bottle hit his nose. He grunted and instinctively covered his face. I spun around, grabbed the back of a nearby chair, and shoved it into him. The chair hit his legs. He stumbled and fell backward.
I didn't stick around.
I pushed open the door and ran into the hallway. I skipped the elevator and sprinted down the stairs. I heard Matthew cursing behind me. I burst out of the hotel, ran to the street, and flagged down a passing patrol car. "Help!
Someone broke in."
I pointed to the second-floor window of the hotel. 2 officers got out and rushed into the hotel. Matthew had just come down the stairs and was tackled to the ground before he could explain. He was still clutching the screwdriver. As they pinned him down, he screamed, "This isn't fair. I was just following my brother's orders." The police pulled a piece of paper from his pocket. It was an address card with my name on it, and on the back, a detailed escape route. 20 minutes later, I sat in the back of the police car. The tax investigator I'd met earlier arrived with his team. The investigator walked toward me with a safe, his face grim. "Mrs. Davis, we found all of your husband's brother Matthew's legal documents hidden in the ledger's lining. He's alive and well. And we also found an even more shocking contract. Your husband and Matthew signed it 2 years ago, using your pension and all your credit lines as collateral to run an illegal offshore gambling platform." I took the documents the investigator handed me. The edges of the paper were a bit worn. There was Eric's signature on it. "He didn't just steal the money," the investigator said, looking me in the eye, his voice low. "He was planning to have all the debt come due at this moment, then make you take all the criminal responsibility, so he and his brother could start over abroad." I looked out at the waves. Matthew was being pushed into a police car. Eric was in prison, thinking his scheme was about to succeed. I took the pen from the investigator's hand. Below the contract signed by both Matthew and Eric, I wrote a line. "Go ahead, send this to all the judicial authorities." I handed the contract back to the investigator. I pushed the thick mortgage contract toward the tax investigator. He put on gloves and flipped through it page by page. With each page, his frown deepened. I sat in the chair, the cup of black tea in my hand long cold. Eric hadn't been idle in the detention center. My phone kept buzzing with notifications. He'd used a fellow inmate's account to send me over 30 voice messages in the past hour. I silenced my phone and tossed it into my bag. The investigator put down the documents. "This contract proves he planned everything 2 years ago. He used your personal credit lines to finance his non-existent casino. Legally, you're now a joint guarantor for these debts." I nodded. I knew. This was the last card he'd left me. He wanted me to spend the rest of my life burdened with this astronomical debt. "I want to auction off all his assets," I said. The investigator looked at me. "He's already filed for bankruptcy protection. All assets are frozen. Unless you can prove these assets were maliciously transferred, you won't get a cent." I walked out of the tax bureau building. A light drizzle was falling. I stood by the roadside and hailed a taxi. I told the driver to take me to the old house in Wyoming. 2 hours later, I stood in the familiar living room. The house was empty. All the furniture had been removed. Only dust remained on the floor. I walked straight into the study. One of the floorboards was slightly raised. I pried open that board. Beneath it was a rusty iron box. Inside were records of all the high-end antique auctions Eric had bought from 5 years ago, and an undisclosed deed of inheritance. It was from his sister, a collection of highly valuable Impressionist paintings. In his bankruptcy filing, Eric had listed these paintings as damaged and discarded. I picked up my phone and called the auction house manager. "I want to commission a private auction from you. The items are a set of rare, original paintings." The manager was polite on the other end. "Mrs. Davis, we only accept items with legal proof of ownership." I laid out the paintings Eric had claimed were damaged, one by one on the floor. I adjusted the angle, took high-resolution photos, and sent them to the manager. Just as I pressed send, the landline in the house rang. It was a line that hadn't been used in a long time. I picked up the phone. "Don't waste your energy," Eric's voice came through. He sounded calm. "My sister's paintings were sold to an overseas buyer through anonymous channels a year ago. The photos you have are just a few forgeries." I let out a cold laugh. I looked at the painting. On the back of the frame was an extremely tiny, pinprick-sized stamp. It was the anti-counterfeiting seal of the Global Art Authentication Association. "You sold the forgeries, didn't you?" I asked. "You kept the real ones in the basement." You planned to cash out with the fakes and then use the real ones as collateral for the bank. But you didn't expect the bank people to be too stupid to recognize they were real. There was 5 seconds of silence on the phone. Eric's breathing became rapid. How do you know? He asked. Because your sister, to avoid taxes back then, specially had fluorescent markers put on these paintings, I said softly. I'm holding an ultraviolet lamp right now. The entire painting is covered in fluorescent codes to my eyes. The call was disconnected. I put down the receiver. There was a rapid knock at the door. It wasn't the police. It was the bank's legal department manager. He strode into the living room with 2 men in suits. Mrs. Davis, according to the bankruptcy court's notice, we need to take immediate possession of all movable property in this house, the manager said bluntly. I pointed at the paintings on the floor. You came just in time. This batch is worth about $3 million. Enough to cover half of his shortfall, right? The manager walked over, crouched down, and carefully examined the painting frames. His hand trembled slightly. He pulled a miniature flashlight from his pocket and shone it on the seal. This is authentic. He turned to look at his colleague behind him. Quick, pack all of these up and take them away. Get them into the bank vault immediately. As the group scrambled to pack everything up, a man carrying a canvas bag appeared at the entrance. It was Eric's good brother, Matthew. He looked at the room full of bank employees, his face turning pale. The canvas bag in his hand held the tools he had originally planned to use to steal the paintings back. He tried to run, but I had already left a message for the auction house manager. The 2 burly security guards at the door blocked his way. Mr. Matthew, right? The manager walked up to him politely and took the canvas bag from his hand. Your tools here are perfect for removing the anti-theft bars behind the frames. Thanks for the help. Everyone in the room burst out laughing. At that moment, Matthew seemed to lose all his strength. He watched as the bank employees tore off the fake certificates Eric had forged from what were once his spoils. I stood at the doorway of the study, watching the scene unfold. The news Eric would hear in prison would be the final breakdown of his life. After these real paintings were auctioned off by the bank, not only did he fail to cash out, but he also triggered the maximum penalty from the bankruptcy court, criminal bankruptcy fraud, for maliciously hiding assets. The sound of packing tape being ripped echoed through the house. It was my favorite sound. It signaled the end of my debt. I also tore off the last layer of disguise Eric had stuck on me. I turned and walked out the door. I didn't glance back at the paintings. I walked to my car and started the engine. This time, no one could stop me. I moved to another small town 3,000 kilometers away. No one here knew me. No one knew about my 7-year marriage, and no one knew Eric. My new apartment was by the sea. The floor-to-ceiling windows were huge. I woke up at 6 every morning. After my run, I would go to the coffee shop downstairs and buy a black coffee. I no longer used my old email address. All my bank card numbers were changed. I threw the address book labeled Wyoming and the old photo album into the shredder in the apartment building's basement. That afternoon, the mailman stuffed a thick envelope into my mailbox. There was no sender's name. I brought it inside and placed it on the dining table. I didn't rush to open it. I went into the kitchen and made myself a sandwich. I watched the waves crash against the rocks outside the window. The spray shot up high. I tore open the envelope. Inside was a court judgment with a red stamp and a letter. The judgment bore a red seal. Eric was sentenced to 12 years in prison for financial fraud, misappropriation of client trust funds, and maliciously hiding assets. During his incarceration, the court forcibly auctioned off all the property they could find, including the old clothes he tried to have someone sell for him while in custody. The letter was from the prison administration. It stated that inmate Eric Davis had applied to contact his only emergency contact. He had written 3 full pages. The first page said he shouldn't have driven that night. The second page said he was too young and didn't know better back then. The third page said he now dreams every night of the scent in that house and the dinners I made for him. I looked at the letter. The handwriting was messy, with some parts crumpled. This was his last attempt to gain attention through emotional manipulation. I didn't finish reading it. I folded the letter. I also received a courier package from my lawyer. It was the final effective document for the divorce decree. Eric had signed it. In that section, he even wrote a strange line. If you come see me just once, I'll give you the password for that non-existent last 300,000 fund. He still thought he had some leverage to tempt me. I walked to the kitchen trash can. I threw the 3-page letter in. It didn't even catch a spark. I picked up the divorce decree and neatly placed it in my file box. I closed the box and moved it to the top shelf.
The doorbell rang.
I checked through the video doorbell. It was a deliver man with a potted plant. I signed for it and placed it in front of the floor-to-ceiling window. Sunlight shone on the green leaves. Just then, my phone rang. The screen showed an unfamiliar landline number. I answered. Mrs. Davis, a cold voice said. It was the prosecutor handling his case. Eric tried to contact the victim again from prison yesterday, violating the contact ban during his sentence. The court just imposed additional penalties on him. He's now been moved to a sealed solitary confinement cell with all communication banned and no visitation allowed. All his personal communication privileges have been completely revoked for the next 5 years. I stood by the window. I looked at the distant coastline. The sky was blue, like an unstained piece of cloth. Got it, I said. I hung up the phone. I pulled the curtain over the floor-to-ceiling window. The sunlight was blocked out. I turned on my computer and logged into an online course platform. I signed up for an advanced accounting class. I'm going to learn how to lock every single penny into my own safe. My phone buzzed again. It was a text from an unknown number. I know you're here. I've sent someone to see you. That's your future. I didn't reply. I went straight to the carrier's website and applied for a new number. I closed the window and walked into the bedroom. I took out a clean set of clothes, planning to take a stroll in the nearby park. That potted plant was thriving in the sunlight. It didn't need Eric, and it didn't need those old lies. It only needed water and sunlight. I'm just like that plant. I don't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. I walked out of the apartment building, tucking the keys into my bag. This key belongs only to me. I locked the door. I turned and strode toward the street corner. The sun was warm. The wind carried a salty sea scent. I didn't look back at the entire apartment building even once. This is my life. A morning that truly belongs to me, free of lies. I took a deep breath, stepped lightly, and disappeared into the crowd.